Hey y'all! Thought we'd pop in today to talk about something every fiber crafter has run into at least once. Those pesky thread spools with holes too big for your machine's holder. You know the ones. You go to the store, you find the perfect shade, that exact color you've been hunting for, and then realize it doesn't come in the spool size that actually fits your machine. You sigh, you buy it anyway, and when you get home, the thing wobbles like it's possessed. Every time you start stitching, it rattles and chatters and sometimes even takes flight across the room. Fun! I've been there. In fact, that's exactly what happened to me not too long ago. I'd picked up a couple of gorgeous shades, couldn't resist them, but the spools had center holes way too big for my thread holder. I thought, no problem, I'll make it work. Famous last words, right? As soon as I started sewing, that spool was clattering around. It was just clattering around like a toddler with a tambourine. I swear I could hear my machine sighing in frustration. I knew I needed a fix, and fast. This was not going to work. Now, my first thought came from a friend of mine who said, "Why don't you just unroll the whole spool and re-roll it onto a spool that fits?" Technically, it would have worked. And I do have plenty of empty spools lying around because my kids love using them for craft projects. They turn them into little robots or spool towers, or sometimes they just roll them around like tiny little bowling pins. So yes, I could have done that. I could have stolen a couple of the spools back and done that. But then I realized I'd have to do it every single time I bought that particular size of spool. And let's be honest, nobody's got time for that. Nobody. Even if I used my machine to help speed things along, it would still take ages. And I just wasn't interested in that amount of effort every single time I bought a spool that didn't fit. So I decided to try something else. Why not? I grabbed one of those wobbly spools and took it with me to the craft store. You know, the kind of mission that makes people working there look at you like, ooh, she's up to something. I went straight to the wooden bead section because I figured if I could find a bead that fits snugly inside the spool's center hole, maybe it could act like a little adapter. Something to fill that extra space and keep that spool kind of steady. It was an instant success. I spent a bit of time there trying different bead sizes like Goldilocks testing chairs. Too small or too tight or too loose, until finally I found one that was just right. It fit snugly in the center of the thread spool. Victory! Of course, the bead center hole was meant to be for string and not a spool holder post, so it wasn't big enough yet. But that's where my electric drill came in. I carefully drilled a hole through the middle, just wide enough to smoothly slide in the spool holder without wobbling. So just a smidge bigger than the spool holder. It's important to go slow and carefully, and to work with the hole that's already in the bead. And let me tell you, it worked like a dream. The spool sat neatly, turned smoothly, and didn't rattle, because the rattling drives me absolutely crazy. It didn't rattle, it didn't bounce, it didn't threaten to fly across the room anymore. My problem was solved. Literally, that rattling sound when it wobbles back and forth while you're actually sewing, where your machine is going, I can't handle that sound. It's the most annoying sound. But here's the real beauty of this little hack. Once you make the bead adapter, you don't have to make it again. I kept the beads that fit perfectly, tucked them away in a tiny jar near my sewing machine. So now, anytime I buy that particular brand or spool size, I already have the perfect fix ready to go. Pop the bead on, slide the whole thing onto the holder, and off we go. Smooth sewing from start to finish, and none of that crazy wobbling that just drives me nuts. So if you've ever struggled with this kind of problem, here are a few extra tips I picked up while experimenting. Tip 1, choose beads made from wood or hard plastic. Okay? Softer materials might warp over time, especially if your sewing area gets humid or warm. Wooden beads hold their shape and add a little bit of charm too. It feels homey and handmade, which I love. Tip 2, when drilling, go slow and steady. Use a really small drill first to create that pilot hole. Go right through the hole of the wooden bead. Then widen it slowly with steadily larger drill bits. Okay? It'll help keep the bead from splitting. If you don't have a drill, you can sometimes widen the hole gently with a round file or a sturdy metal knitting needle, but it'll take longer. So if you do have a drill and really small drill bits, just use that. Tip 3, mark your bead sizes. If you end up making several adapters for different spool types, keep a little cheat sheet or label them somehow. I write the spool brand name right on the bead in pencil. Easy to erase or change later, but at least it's marked. Tip number 4, you can paint or seal the beads if you want. A little clear coat or craft varnish helps keep them clean, especially if you're sewing with light colored thread that could pick up dust. And because we're crafters, we might as well make it cute. You can color code them by size, wrap them in washi tape, or even glue a little rhinestone to them. There's no reason your sewing fixes can't be as charming as your projects, so yeah, it's okay to get creative with them. I like to use paint markers to kind of jazz them up a little bit. Now, let's take a second to appreciate how simple this solution really is. Sometimes we overcomplicate things when all it takes is a creative look at what we already have. That's one of the joys of crafting. Problem solving with style. You can go from frustrated to clever in about 10 minutes flat. And suddenly, all of a sudden, you're not just sewing, you're inventing. I've been using my bead adapters for a while now, and they've held up beautifully. I even made a few extras from my embroidery threads and some of my older spools that don't quite sit right. They saved me a ton of time and frustration. And best of all, no more mid-seam spool launches across the room. And that rattling sound is gone. If you've ever wondered how this little hack works across different machines, the answer is pretty well. I've tested it on my standard sewing machine and my serger. The trick is to make sure the bead's outer layer fits snugly in the spool, but doesn't stick out so far that it catches on the thread as it unwinds. A smooth spin is what you're after. This is also a great project if you love that hands-on satisfaction of making your own tools. There's something kind of empowering about saying, I made this myself. You take control of your crafting experience instead of letting your tools boss you around. You could even take it further and make a little sewing toolkit for all your machine hacks. Things like spool adapters or bobbin winders or thread caps, all in one cute little jar or tin. I've started keeping mine in a mason jar next to my pin cushion, and it's become one of my favorite little collections. And if you're someone who enjoys sharing tips within your crafting circle, this one's a hit. It's the kind of hack that makes people go, why didn't I think of that? You could even include one of your bead adapters in a handmade gift basket for a sewing friend. Wrap it up with some thread, a few needles, and maybe a little note explaining what it's for. It's useful and thoughtful. Now, before we wrap up, I just want to remind you that the best crafting moments often come from problem solving like this. The frustration that starts a project can lead to a solution that not only makes your work easier, but adds joy to it. So next time your spool wobbles, take it as an opportunity to get creative and maybe raid the bead aisle while you're at it. Well, y'all, that's about it. Have you ever come up with your own clever sewing or crafting fix? Drop your favorite DIY hacks down below in the comments. I'd love to hear what you've done with your tools to make them work better for you. Happy stitching!